Hello, you're welcome. You're welcome onto my channel today, and it gives me great joy to observe you are viewing this video. I'm Professor Olayinka Akonle. I'm a lecturer in the university. On this channel, I do a number of stuff, but all the stuff I do, you can easily group them into four: sociology, research, relationship, and migration. Meanwhile, if you have not subscribed to this channel, kindly go ahead and click subscribe on your screen right now to join my family of subscribers, and so that you might be alerted every time I drop new content. Today, the video is on concept of mode of production. Concept of mode of production. This is a very important concept within the framework of Marxism. Meanwhile, I have two videos on this channel, one on Marxism, one on Marx. So view the videos so that you might be sufficiently up to date to be able to understand what I want to discuss in this video. And the video will be likely brief, because I just think it's very important for me to explain this concept a little more. I've explained this in the video on Marxism, a little on the video on Marx. So concept of mode of production basically means how a society organizes its economy, to produce goods and services. Countries produce goods and services, societies produce goods and services to be able to meet the needs, consumption, and other needs of their citizens. So, but in all of this, in attempting to produce goods and services for the citizens of people of a particular society, that society must organize its economic system in a way to facilitate this production of goods and services. And this is very important for us in sociology and humanities or social sciences, because it is through this organization that we are able to understand human behavior, that we are able to understand certain issues that are very paramount and strategic in the society. So sociologists, social scientists, even people in art use Marx ideas that we know as Marxism as a theory to be able to explain human behavior or activities that are very important in societies. So this is why we look at mode of production, because we believe the way a society or a country, organizes its economy, its productive processes and service provision processes, can give us an insight into why people behave in certain ways in that society. So we are able to look at the economy of that society, structure of that society in terms of production or productive activities or service provision, to be able to give understanding and explanation. Don't forget, the essence of all of this is to understand how people behave, how they relate, and why they behave certain ways. So the modes of production then become units of analysis in that particular instance. So, and there are major components of modes of production. What are the elements of mode of production or dominant mode of production? Don't forget, it's very important for you to know this. Now, listen to this. You may have many modes of production in a society per time. It's possible you have different modes of production in a single society per time. The economy of the society as a structure may have different organization within the economic system. So there are different types of these modes of production. Common example today is capitalism. But capitalism, as we know today, is very prevalent across many societies. Even those that say they don't want to agree that they're capitalist society, they have preponderance of capitalism. The few that you see that are trying to be socialistic, maybe like Scandinavian countries, Eastern Europe, and the rest of them, you have also elements of capitalism. But capitalism as a dominant mode of production today, even when you have different modes of production in societies, you are likely to have a dominant mode of production. Even in capitalist society, you can still have some elements of other modes of production. In history, Karl Marx, traced the history of capitalism or dominant modes of production in contemporary society, in which case you have the very first one from the angle of Karl Marx, is what we call primitive communism. After primitive communism, then you have slavery as a mode of production. So primitive communism is a mode of production. Then you have slavery, which is a mode of production. You have feudalism, which is a mode of production. You have capitalism, which is a mode of production. For Karl Marx, the last stage of mode of production is like to be socialism or communism. But with the disintegration of USSR, Soviet Union, they will no longer have socialism or communism the way Karl Marx predicted then. So, and that's why Karl Marx mentioned that the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggle. Within the tradition of Karl Marx, you can find that even in primitive communism, in slavery, in feudalism, in capitalism, you have inherent contest, antagonism. In this, we have classes competing, struggling, the rich and the poor. These are what Karl Marx we can regard as classes within the tradition of Karl Marx. That you have all of this, the rich and the poor, competing. They are struggling because the rich want to perpetually exploit the poor. So from primitive communism, even to capitalism, even to socialism where it exists, you can still see different classes competing within the mode of production. So all these primitive communism, slavery, feudalism, capitalism are all mode of production. But these have been the progression for Karl Marx, that society progressed across all of these modes of production, from primitive communism, then progression to slavery with different articles of trade, then to feudalism, where you have land as a major element of that mode of production, to capitalism, production of goods and services. So when you look at it, the other constituents of modes of production, all these examples I've given, you have what Karl Marx called forces of mode of production, you have relations of production. All these put together then can give us modes of production. So relations of production, forces of production are elements of modes of production. Now, what are forces of production? These are things that are brought together, aggregation of different elements to produce goods and services within a dominant mode of production. So, generally speaking, we can then say forces of production, relations of production, all of them come together to form a dominant mode of production. Don't forget what I said, that you can have many modes of production within a particular society, but one might be dominant. For example, that does not mean we still talk about modern slavery, though there's a lot of effort to stop that, but you still have some element of slavery where humans are articles of trade. In some societies, you still have human traffickers, you have people who employ people and do not pay them. They treat them as articles of trade. We have modern slavery every day. We still have feudalism, where people work for others on land and they pay rent, they pay royalty, or they work on that land and they hold the land in trust for the serfs, the landowners. Even in capitalist society, you still have some element of the other modes of production. When you say capitalism in the US, capitalism in Europe, you still have some element of other modes of production. Well, capitalism is the most dominant. So forces of production as a constituent of modes of production talks about the tools that are used in production of goods and services, the technology, the raw materials, the labor, which is what the poor sell, in productive processes in capitalist society. Then you have relations of production, which talk about relationship, between different classes in modes of production. Relation of production talks about relationship between classes, how people interact in productive and service provision processes. And this tends to be very problematic. For example, in capitalism, you talk about the haves and the have-nots. Those who own the mode of production are bourgeoisie, they are the upper class. And those who don't own the means of production, they don't own the forces of production, they determine the relation of they are the proletariat, they are the poor, because they sell their labor to the rich, the haves, the bourgeoisie in production processes, and they are paid pittance for the labor, or peanut for the labor they sell or they offer for production of goods and services. So you have So relation of production then talks about the social and the legal structure. The social and the legal structure in mode of production. And this social and legal structure determines the relationship between the different classes in that dominant mode of production. In capitalist mode of production, you have the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, that is, those who have the mode of production, who owns the forces of production, and those who don't own the forces of production, who sell their labor in production processes and service production processes. So, in slavery, humans are the articles of trade. You have the slave owners, the slave masters, and you have the slaves. Then in feudalism, you have the landlords, and you have, the peasants who work on the land, And in socialism, which and communism, which Marx predicts will happen, then the state will hold everything in trust for everybody. But that never materialized, and that's why some people have argued that Karl Marx have been criticized to extinction. Even in primitive communism, that means the community holding everything in trust of everybody. But it's very primitive, not as advanced as socialism and communism, where the state will hold everything in trust. So these are the issues. Then when you have, the social and legal structure then moderate human interactions in the dominant modes of production in capitalist society. So then Karl Marx talks about historical materialism, which talk about progression from different modes of production. Progression, historical materialism, how societies have progressed in historical terms across different modes of production. And in this historical materialism, that's when you talk about progression from primitive communism to slavery, then to feudalism, to capitalism, and ultimately to socialism and communism. But socialism and communism have not materialized. Well, let's see what happens. The world is still here. We never can say it will never. But for now, it has not. So, and this is how modes of production continue to progress. And for Karl Marx, one mode of production will replace another, depending on the outcome of class struggle. If the proletariat, the poor, are able to engage in constant antagonism against the rich, the haves, the bourgeoisie, then they can become class in themselves, to class for themselves, to liberate themselves. Then capitalism will then be swept away to be replaced with socialism or communism, according to Karl Marx. But this essentially is about concept of mode of production. And I think I should drop this because there has been so much confusion about this. And this is very important because it gives us an insight on how societies have developed over time, how they have progressed over time, and how they might progress into the future. And this concept of mode of production is very important because it gives us an insight on how societies explore and exploit their environment to produce goods for their needs. And societies have always been exploiting and exploring their society to produce. So in development sociology, in development study, and environmental studies, it is very important for us to understand the concept of mode of production, to be able to understand how humans interact with their environment to produce what they need. So this is why if people are in development studies, development sociology, or even economics, humanities and social sciences and arts, concept of mode of production is very important if you want to understand how production of goods and services, is organized in society per time. How production of goods and services is organized in society per time, and how human beings behave in the economy. So the concept of mode of production can give us an insight into this. Wow. Till I see you in my next video, please subscribe and bye for now.